Yes! I didn't even Google it, but yes.
Oh,
It's
it's
supposed to be in my head.
It doesn't? No. Okay.
Oh, shoot.
Need to help. I don't know. Carry or move?
Okay, no, it's on.
You're okay. Okay. We're ready? Are we ready?
Yep.
Okay. All right, welcome everybody. Today is Tuesday, May 26, 2026. The time is 4:01 p.m. and we are convened as the Provo City School Board of Education. We are meeting at 280 West, 940 North in Provo, Utah. We'll begin with a roll call. I'm Jennifer Partridge, Board President.
Gina Hales, Board Vice President.
Melanie Hall, board member.
Lisa Williams, Board Member.
Meg Van Wagenen, board member.
Rachel Rose, student board member.
Emily Harrison, Board Member.
Terry McCabe, board member.
Devin Daly, Business Administrator.
Wendy House, superintendent.
Okay, thank you. And we want to welcome our other staff and our guests and thank everyone who's made this meeting possible today. Do we have a motion to convene our study session?
I move that we convene a study session.
Okay, motion made by Board Member Boyce. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Board Member Harrison. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, we are now in our study session and we're going to begin with our board member training and today that is Board Member Meg Van Wagenen.
Sweet. Okay, today we're going to quickly talk about how to make effective agendas for school board meetings. So the information that I'm sharing today we're getting from the USBA's Guide to Effective School Boards, specifically on page 24. Okay, so how do we make these agendas that run our meetings essentially, right, every 2 weeks? To start, I just want to share this. I appreciated this reminder. A well-structured agenda sets the tone for productive school board meetings and ensures crucial matters are addressed efficiently. So, the board president is responsible to shape the content. And I think we have we have board president and board vice president, and you guys work together with the superintendent. The superintendent is then tasked in preparing the agenda based on however the board leadership wants to shape what content they want to have in our meetings. Then board members can submit items to the superintendent or the board president or board leadership of things that they want to potentially have included on an agenda. Our current practice as a board is if there's 3 board members who are requesting the same agenda item, that is prioritized on the agendas. I do think it's also helpful as we suggest different agenda items that sometimes there's items that can be addressed, like maybe it's more of a question that board district leadership can just say, this is how this is being handled, this is what the update for that is. That doesn't necessarily need to be something that we have on a board meeting agenda. I think that's part of making them efficient and thought out and productive. Okay, what else do I have for you guys? Planning the agenda happens twice a month, which I know for myself as a board member, board meetings come so quickly. I'm like, oh, I swear we just had a board meeting. So interlay that with our board leadership and superintendent and business administrator, and that agenda planning is also twice a month, and that is like an extra commitment, extra time in planning and being thoughtful about how we're going to spend our time here. So part of that is prioritizing, what are priority topics, organizing, and sometimes multiple topics can be combined into one agenda item. And then also the task of time allocation, right? Like how long should we spend on each agenda item, which is tricky, right? Because we tend to go, but it's a way I think ideally to keep us on track, right? And then once the draft agenda is established, board leadership usually sends it out and said this is kind of the draft. I think that's an opportunity for anyone to say, to give some input if needed. And then from there, different stakeholders, depending on the agenda item, are reached out to gather materials for the board to have in preparation for the meeting so we can have a useful discussion. And to close, just creating effective agendas involves a balance of essential matters, meaningful discussions, and respecting everyone's time. So
Thank you.
The agenda in service.
One of the things you said reminded me of I got to go speak to a scout group like a Cub Scout group
Oh.
a couple of years ago when I was on a vice president, and I mentioned something about the agenda planning meeting, and one of the 8-year-old kids was like, "Wait, you have a meeting to plan your meetings?" His mind was blown. He's like, "That's crazy."
He's like, I'm never growing up.
You're right.
Welcome to adulting.
We do. Yes, we do. So, thank you, Meg. Okay. Speaking of time allocation, our next item is our dual language immersion discussion. And as we talked about at our last meeting specifically, this is one of our focuses now. We want to figure out what adjustments we may be making to the dual language immersion program, but we also discussed that that's going to take some time. And there's a lot to figure out, and also a lot of other things that our district leadership is working on and balancing and prepping for next school year and all of those kinds of things. So this is just part of what's going to be a long, ongoing discussion. And I just want to speak for myself in saying I'm blown away at how much information you guys already put together. Exceeded my expectations for sure. But we are going to cap it at the time we've set aside today. So we've got about 45 minutes, and if we get through everything here, great. And if not, we will just continue it next time. So Wendy, I'll turn it over to you.
Bonnie, can I take the screen? And Judy, can you turn on the air conditioner? Thank you. It feels very warm in here.
We'll see.
So first off, I just want to say thank you to a whole bunch of people who behind the scenes put together what ended up being 105 slides just for the 5 questions that I asked them to help me with.
Wow.
And so we pared that down to just a little over 50. I doubt that we'll get through that 50 today. But I want to thank our DLI principals. All helped with this, and I appreciate those of you that are here. Clint is here. I think Jamie was going to try to be here. And then Paula serves on our DLI committee. Sarah Parrish has been working from China on this document, and Doug, who oversees that committee, and just who else am I missing? Anyway, you guys are amazing, and the only reason this even, I just said, here's kind of my basic outline of just some of the questions and ideas, and everybody just started pouring stuff into the document, and so just really appreciative of everyone who helped. So that's why it says May through June, because this is going to be an ongoing discussion as we've talked about. So I know this sounds really basic in terms of the goals of a DLI program, but we actually felt like this was really important to emphasize because it really makes it a different kind of program than a language exposure program. It isn't just about developing the bilingualism and the biliteracy piece, which is the piece that we often think about. It also says in the Utah State Board of Education goals that we want to ensure that students are achieving at very high levels, that they're not behind their peers in reading and math. And you do see that in our data as a state. And then the last piece of this is that cultural competency piece of really understanding and appreciating other cultures, and also to have college and career readiness, which we'll talk a little bit about. Students do have to reach different proficiency indicators at the end of every single year. These are the 4 languages that we have here in Provo City School District, and they are tested on those languages with the exception of Timpanogos because they are not following the state model, and I'm not pointing that out as a bad thing. I just want people have asked me, well, what are the differences? And I'm like, it runs a slightly different model, and so Clint's here to help talk about some of those distinctions if you have questions about it, because he's going to know a heck of a lot more than I am. The academic excellence is about exceeding those standard student performance metrics. I have asked each of our principals to pull together their end of year data, and they are going to disaggregate that by those that are in the DLI program, from those who are not, just so that you can see some patterns that will be there. We don't have that for tonight because they were still pulling all of their data from the end of the year. And then I really did like this piece of the cultural competency part. It's really to also help students with future job markets, and I think you are hearing that come up in some of the conversations as are there different levels of usefulness. I don't love that word, but in terms of some languages might be more in demand in Utah for those job markets, say, than possibly others. And then there's a whole bunch of long-term goals, and sometimes we forget about these pieces. These are happening as a result of our secondary work, that the goal is that they're taking courses in middle school to prepare them for their AP course in that language in the 9th grade year. Sometimes the students will take it in their 10th grade year, particularly I think this is the case with Chinese, that will happen just because it is a more difficult test and it is a more difficult language. Once they pass that AP language exam, then they can go on to those bridge level courses. I'll talk more about that in a minute. Another goal is that our students are earning the seal of biliteracy. And by the way, anybody in the audience can chime in when I say something stupid or you need to add something that I am forgetting that would be really important. So please interrupt. That seal of biliteracy, they're demonstrating proficiency in English and another language, and it's not just spoken word. It is also written language, speaking, listening, and reading. So I think that's important to remember. You do not have to be in the DLI program to get a seal of biliteracy. We do have a lot of native Spanish speakers, for example, that will get this without having been in the DLI program. But certainly our proficiency levels, having gone through DLI, will allow them to do this. And then I also had a note, I think we have pulled those numbers in the past of how many students have received that seal, and I can look that up and we can reference that at a later time so that you know. They are earning college credit at the 3,000 level. We did have a little hiccup for a while where we thought some of the universities were not going to allow those 3,000 level courses, but we got some legislation put in place and put some pressure on that. So they are offered at that 3,000 level, which can, if they're taking, so if they took the AP exam in their 9th grade year and they pass it, then they would take 3 bridge courses. Those are 3 credit hours each, so they're earning 9 credit hours at that 3,000 level, which is moving them close to earning a minor. If you think about most minors in a particular language are around 20 hours, even maybe a little bit less than that, it's putting them well on that path in that direction. It is also to note that not every single student who comes out of DLI is going to major or minor in that language. And I think we need to be careful about saying, well, if they're not getting a major or a minor in it, then that means this program hasn't been successful, because we need to think about the other job application of that. I've heard that from some parents about, well, my kid never went on and used this in the university. And I'm like, but did they use it? Because I bet you in many cases they did. And then this piece of career readiness is that it gives them another set of skills to be able to be bilingual. The lady that does my hair went through the Chinese dual immersion program in Canyon School District. She has not spent a day in college, but she has several Chinese clients and she speaks to them in Chinese all of the time. And I just thought, this is amazing. So I was asking her to tell me a little bit about her experiences and whatnot. She's been to China a couple of times, and just it was pretty amazing just to watch just even the experience that had provided to her. Her husband is also majoring in business, and so you just don't know what's going to happen, and just to get that perspective from her was helpful. So this is kind of what we were referring to from before, that a language exposure program is very different. So when we're talking about the foreign language classes or world language classes that we take in middle school or in high school, that really is much more of a language exposure program. I do know that there are students who can go through those programs and they can then end up in a university, or they can maybe go live in that country and become very fluent in those languages. I would still argue it's not at the same level. I tried to explain to somebody that when you're going through DLI, it means I could explain how this phone works in that language, like if I knew the scientific terminology for that. Whereas if I'm just going and getting conversationally fluent in something, that is a very different level. This is a very academic level at which individuals are learning to converse in these languages. So it's much more than just a familiarity with it. Language exposure programs don't necessarily require certain proficiency levels and these measurable outcomes like DLI does.
Can I ask? a
Please,
question?
please.
These are state goals.
Yes.
Or these district goals.
They're both. So the state has set those in our dual language assurances, and we have adopted that because we follow the state model. And I did link those in the second slide. There are links to those specific websites. You do have to dig a little bit into finding the program assurances that are a part of it, but we have a couple of screenshots of what those assurances look like. So they're not just things that we're inventing. These are things that have been developed by the state.
But do we need to change the goals now that we have a strategic plan?
I don't think so, because our strategic plan is talking about post-secondary readiness, and those DLI goals I feel like would align really successfully with that, because our students are leaving with that AP credit and also those bridge courses. And so I feel like it's certainly not countering it or working against it in any way. I think some of the questions that I've received from parents are things like, do we need to have more options in terms of language exposure? So I think that becomes a more interesting conversation in terms of, we have DLA for these students that are really dedicated to this language production. Is that at the expense then of language exposure? Do we need to make sure that those pieces are also in place and are as robust? For other students across the board, what might that look like? So those might be some of the things that we could certainly look at. Other questions? It feels like this is at the end of a section, so it's a good time to stop for questions. All right.
Well, one
Please.
thing I was just thinking about that, because I do think our language exposure programs are also really successful, and I really like that. Like, we have students passing the AP test also in a language that they started in secondary school. So, you know, I think they are also hitting some of these goals, just not in the same kind of intense academic immersive way,
That's
right?
right.
But those are still opportunities for people who maybe want to take a different approach towards that.
I think one data point that people have asked for that we can pull, this would be a little tricky, so it'll take us a little bit of time, but pulling the data of the students who take an AP course that we can see have been involved in it in elementary school versus those who are just taking that course because they're not, so that we can see if there's any difference in what that might look like. I think you'll probably see fewer different, I'm just hypothesizing here, but I think you'll see fewer differences in Spanish. Probably, you know, if somebody's gonna take, we don't even offer Chinese at, you know, most of our schools in terms of like just a basic Chinese class, so how would they pass an AP Chinese test, right? And so what does that look like in the long term? Some of the challenges of DLI, and this comes up time and time again, and we've heard this from community meetings, we saw this in our surveys of parents, is the experience of those non-DLI students in a DLI school. We've heard that parents will choice their child to a different school because they have heard stories about experiences of students on the non-DLI side. And we know that parents listen to other parents. That's really what influences a lot of their decisions. And we do have some challenges. Sometimes those non-DLA classrooms can sometimes be overly large, as you're going to see in some of the data that we share with you, and sometimes they can be really small. And either way, it can provide a challenge. If you only have one teacher for your non-DLI students, regardless of how big that class is, it does produce a challenge, because if you're dealing with any kind of behavior challenges, or you need to separate students, or a kid just needs a different way in which to be taught, or sometimes you get an overrepresentation of students with disabilities in that class, it creates strain, and you've heard that from teachers too that have been on that non-DLI side that just want people to be aware of those challenges.
Can I ask here, along with that, I've had parents share with me that there are some that opt into DLI not because they're seeking it out, but because of these challenges in the English track. So they are opting; they don't want that, so they are defaulting to a DLI. I don't know. That was just experience that have been shared with me, and concerns like I'm just doing this because that's what's here.
And we see that in the survey data too, that they'll say, I chose this DLI program because I heard this happening. Yeah.
And I think that even within that though, right, it's still clearly there's so many benefits from it that even if you're choosing it for that reason, there's reasons there these students are going to benefit from
That's right.
participating. I don't want to say that that's not a reason to
No,
choose.
for sure. For sure. Do you guys have anything to add, those of you that are DLI principals, about? Okay, just want to make sure. So I just put these together for each of the elementary schools to show you the number of DLI students and the number of non-DLI students. And the reason I put the number of non-DLI classes is because there are some principals that very intentionally will place 2 classes if they can at all possible, do that. You're always going to have 2 classes for the DLI students, so that's important to know. So that number, when you have the number of DLI students, you're always dividing that in half. That's how many would be in that class at any given time. And so you can see you get some challenges. So I have a 6th grade non-DLI class of 26, but I also have a 1st grade class of 7. That's hard. Or a 4th grade class of 29. I want to pull my hair out when I think about that. You know, like that would be a lot. You look at Edgemont. Notice that there has been, and maybe Jared could speak to this more of a deliberate attempt at 2 classes, but you notice if I put 2 classes in 1st grade, then I've got 13 kids at each of those grade levels, right? And so, whereas if I have 50, I've got 25, so it does, or 62. So those are just some choices that are being made by the principal because they want to have that flexibility. Obviously, if I have a class of 7, I can't split that across 2 teachers. There's no way that would be justified. But is there anything you want to add to that?
No, just like if you look at that 1st grade scenario right there, I mean, technically that could just be 1 class, obviously. And as we talked about the added cost, that's just an illustration of what that could look like. You see that in their 3rd and their 5th grade.
And I think it's important too that principals make these choices because there might be more students with disabilities in that class, and so they feel the need to split it into 2. There might be more behavior issues in a particular grade level. And so it gets really easy to try to say, well, by numbers, but that's what Devin and I are always like, you can fit that many people in. Jared's like, no. Jared and Jason are like, you don't understand the 5 kids that we have been working with in this particular grade level. And so those nuanced decisions become really important.
Before you go on,
Yeah.
Taking Edgemont, for example, like in 1st grade, which of these grades is the district subsidizing which level, and how many is the principal having to use like TSSA money, or they're...
So
Do
you
you
look
see what
at look at 5th grade. 5th grade
Uh-huh.
has 68 full kids, and there are 4 classes. We're subsidizing at least 1 because if you didn't have DLI, you'd only have 3 classes.
Right.
So
How many of those are being subsidized by the district versus the...
So we're subsidizing 4 at Edgemont. And the reason that you subsidize 4 is either you're subsidizing it on the non-DLI side, or you might have to subsidize it on the DLI side. So 5th grade, none here because these classes are too big, but you have a couple where, like, if you look at, I think there's one at Wasatch, if I remember right, and we can look through that, where you could argue that you could have 1 teacher and you could have an aide in that particular class period, but you have to subsidize because the state model requires us to have those 2 teachers per level, except
So that is actually not true. It's in the assurances that in upper grades you can collapse to 1. So like if it was my school, I would collapse that 5th grade class to 1 and possibly have an aide support it. But that's allowed as the kids go up if you have enough attrition, and it is written into the state assurances.
So how would that model work if I have those 35 kids, let's say it was 30, and I have them in a single class? Is that teacher teaching across 2 grade levels then in the language?
So I've seen districts do different things. I have seen that model where like, and again, this is like typically 4th, 5th, and 6th grade where you don't have enough to justify 2 classes. And I think there is a slide later that has the language of the assurances on there. But I've seen some places where if they're a fluent speaker of both languages, that then they would just do 50% of the day in English, 50% of the day in the language. And then the other option is if you had 2 grade levels like that, then you'd have a split
Okay.
where they're teaching, like that Chinese or French teacher is teaching 3rd grade French, 4th grade French, or
yeah.
whatever that is.
So, and I think we want to throw that out as an option because that's some of the restructuring that could take place. Go ahead, Lisa.
Well, I was just gonna say, and I do think that this is true in our DLI classes. I think it's also sometimes true in a non-DLI school, just depending on the number of kids in a grade. So just in terms of like recognizing that we also sometimes supplement a school just because
Yes.
the number of kids that fall into that grade don't quite fit into 2 classes or do you know what I mean? Or the principal makes the decision to divide them out. So I do think that this also happens at any school where there's a need, right? So that's all I wanted to point out.
And if we wanted to look at what that looks like so that people could have some comparisons, we could certainly do that in a future meeting to kind of see that, because you're right, we don't want it to sound like we're only subsidizing at DLI schools. That is not the case, because if you end up with, say, for example, 36 kids in a grade level, you're gonna split that class. So I am technically subsidizing that school, and I can't take a teacher and split them over 4 different grade levels. So we do that. We do it across the board, but in particular, it does happen at DLI schools. Lakeview, notice the 2 classes, non-DLI students. They have the population to help with that. And then we have Timpanogos, and this is all for 25-26, by the way, so just so that people are aware. And then we have Wasatch, and so you notice Wasatch has a similar situation to Canyon Crest, where you only have 1 class on that non-DLI side. So it does create some challenges, and that's really what we hear a lot from parents of those non-DLI students. What's interesting is when you read through the comments, the parents are not upset about this being an opportunity for students. They just want to make sure that the experience that their child is getting in a non-DLI classroom in a DLI school is as good as the students that are enrolled in DLI. So,
one of the, was it an email or somewhere else that a principal was saying that, because it's a non-DLI school, and they were saying that they would love to be able to have the district subsidize them so they could have smaller class sizes, but that's happening at DLI schools and not at non-DLI schools. Is that accurate? Is that an accurate, like, because according to Lisa and you, it actually is happening. We are subsidizing non-DLI schools.
yeah, if you look at like Franklin Elementary, we're subsidizing. Jared, you can answer this more.
Yeah, or we could look at any school.
Franklin's the
by school.
biggest. Franklin's the biggest one that we're subsidizing just because of it being in CSI status. But
A good example is we actually, like another one that came up is we actually gave if you're just going based off of population of students alone, we actually gave an additional FTE to Rock Canyon, for example. But it still doesn't go as far as she would like it to as a principal in terms of what she's trying to accomplish there. So there are always, and there's challenges that come from if you have a really, I wanted to say mature staff, that's not what I mean. Veteran staff, that's the word I wanted. I didn't want to make it sound like they were old. When you have a veteran staff, those teachers cost more money. And so if I am trying to use some of my supplementary budgets to help support that, that takes a much bigger chunk of that flexible allocation that I have available than if I have newer teachers or I have an intern that's not eating up as much of that budget in that process. So, and that's where you'll hear some strain and some stress that comes from principals as a result of that.
Superintendent.
Please.
We reference this internally as sometimes we round up the FTE in a grade level depending on the numbers. We also have the equity model that we apply to the schools as well, but that roundup is happening in almost every single building, in addition to a DOI in some cases, but an equity model.
Yeah, so we'll do a grade level roundup, but then we also do additional FTE going into schools where students there are high numbers of economically disadvantaged students or based on multilingual learners, and we actually give more FTE if there's more ones and twos, so lower level language proficiency than if they're higher levels of language proficiency. So there's some complexities in how that gets allocated.
And we don't automatically round up.
No, we don't.
It's based on how many kids. So if we feel like that is doable, they could do an intern with a half an FTE, or they could do a split grade level. So it's really a case by case.
It's like magic, but
It's like a puzzle.
oh, that's much better, because magic sounded awesome, and the puzzle, it's a lot harder to do for sure. So, this is we've talked about this before, but you know, I will say this. I think one of the things that I want to give a shout out to our DLI principals is I do think they do a fantastic job in really trying to include all students. I do think there always is this perception of these kids are doing this and my kid is not a part of that. I think there have been some really creative ways to help incorporate the school together, such as specialties. Students are mixed together so you don't have them separated. Lunches are together, you know, different things like that where they are feeling like they're all part of a single school. And even though there might be some cultural events that are tied to their language at that particular school, everybody is welcome and everybody is participating either through art or music or different pieces like that. So we've talked about the additional FTE, the 2-teacher model. I think, you know, I'm kind of, you know, I've said this before that Jason gets a little frustrated with me because I'm like, maybe we need to expand how many DLI schools we have so that we have more opportunities for students to learn Spanish. And he's like, please, no, I can't find enough teachers that are qualified to be able to do that. So that's something that we have to think about. And so it can increase those costs, and then just looking at the sustainability of it and how do we create a model that is going to be sustainable and create great experiences for all students.
This is actually the slide.
Oh, okay,
Go ahead and
excellent.
talk about it and I'll ask if you don't answer.
Okay. So this is the additional FTE that we put in place at each of these elementary schools. So we have Edgemont, Wasatch, Canyon Crest, and Lakeview. This is, if I remember correctly, this is the FTE that we just put in place at these schools specifically to support DLI only. So it's not, and Timpanogos is not included on this list because we did not give them additional FTE to support DLI. We gave them additional FTE because they're economically disadvantaged. There are other pieces in place in their grade level roundups, and so that managed it. I'm sure that if you ask Clint, he would like more FTE than what he was allotted.
Yes.
Yes, please. Sure. So, the other thing that I want to mention too, and I think this comes up in another slide, is that I believe the number is, don't quote me on this, but it is in another slide. I think 177 students are coming in outside of the district, specifically enrolling in DLI programs. That is bringing in some enrollment, right? And so we do have to think about that. And that is something our parents have tried to help us think about, is if you eliminate a language or eliminate one of these programs, how many students could you potentially lose and how many of those are living outside of the district? We've even heard from, I think at the Amelia meeting, we heard some of our Lakeview parents talking about that they specifically are not homeschooling their children because they want their children to be part of the DLI program, and this is an important opportunity for them, and that if it weren't available there, then they would consider that as an option. So go ahead, what's your question? I hope I can answer it.
So the 444, all those, is that from the district? Is that all money come from the district, or are the principals kind of to Melanie's
money
point?
from us.
This is
Okay.
money from us.
And the number that we're using there is a very low ball number. So we're using $110,000 per teacher. That would be the cost of their salary. We're not paying teachers $110,000 because you're going to hear somebody say they don't get paid that. You're right, they don't. They should. They don't. But that would be for an entry-level teacher with their benefits, with their retirement, all of the different pieces, with workman's, everything that we have to pay for an employee. Totals that $110,000, and that's if they're a really new teacher. If you have a teacher that has a master's degree, you have a teacher that has 10 years of experience, that expenditure is much higher that we're actually subsidizing this. So this is a very low estimate as to what it would be. One of the things that's also come up as something that came out in the survey, because I went through and I reread I think, every single comment that came through in but it was really helpful to just remind ourselves of, we get kind of in this general narrative, and I think it's really important to have some of the individual pieces. But a lot of parents don't enroll their students in a DLI program because it's not offered at their neighborhood school, and because transportation is based on them as a parent, that seemed to be a barrier for them. There were some parents that really wanted a specific language, and that was not the language offered at their neighborhood school, and so they went into the non-DLI track, or said, I went into DLI, but it was not my first choice in terms of what language I wanted my child to learn. So it is important to understand that access does depend on some things that aren't that are based on what a parent's socioeconomic status might be. It also might be, how much does the parent know about the programs? And I think our principals do a fantastic job of helping people understand what this program is about, but you still have parents that are not, that don't know. And then another piece, and I think I'll bring this up later, is if the parents move in after first grade, there have been, Jamie's really accepting of kids that want to be in that program beyond first grade. That traditionally has not been our operating procedure here in Provo City School District, so is something that we could look at as well, because that's, a lot of parents have wanted to do it, but could not because my kid moved in second grade or third grade or whatever, so. And so, oh yeah, see, separate slide. So the state model does want students to enter the program in first grade. Jamie is she has like spies at the state. I shouldn't say that. She has really good resources at the state that help us to understand some different pieces. And while that is how the state model works, it's more about the proficiency levels, and we can work with kids in the same way that I like to think about it as, we take multilingual students where English is their second language, and we teach them English no matter what grade level they're coming in. That might be a mindset shift for some of our teachers, but it is something that we could consider and adopt. Please, Jamie.
Well, I was also just going to mention, so the state rule of thumb has always been that you can add through second grade.
Okay.
So if people are not adding and there's openings in second grade, that's a principal's choice.
Okay.
Because the state has really encouraged to add through second grade. I add through sixth grade.
Yeah.
That's where I'm different, but across the state, people add through second.
Redheaded rebel right there.
I'm curious though, when you add them, do you try to see that they have some experience at home with Portuguese, or no, you don't worry about that?
Yeah, in fact, it was kind of interesting because I was on my playground on our with this couple sixth graders. We were all talking, and one of them was like, "Yeah, I moved here in fourth grade, so I couldn't go into immersion." And then the girl next to me was like, "Well, I moved here in fifth grade, and I joined it, so why didn't you?" And she had no experience at all. So I believe any kid can learn the language. The only thing I talk to parents about is just that you do have to be prepared that it's going to be hard, and they're going to come in and they're going to be like, I didn't understand half the day at school today. But that if the parent and the child have that growth mindset, then they can do it. The other thing that's really important about this is that math in fourth grade is taught in English. And so it's a low stakes move for fourth, fifth, and sixth grade because English, language arts, and math are in English. So really the only content area that's being tested is science that the kids are learning in that language. And so I think that's another reason why parents are
might as well.
Yeah.
That's excellent. Doug, what were you going to say?
I think it could be later on. I think when you're talking about policy, we do have a policy that talks about placement. Student Services manages the placement with the enrollment process in first grade, but it explicitly says once school has started that first grade year, that responsibility moves to the building principal to have that sort of discretion that Jamie's speaking about.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for adding that.
Yes, I think it's also important to understand that we add kids in the secondary as well.
Oh, yeah.
Not just in the elementary.
And that is where the language testing comes in. So it's I do think that principals who have someone that come with the language experience, if they are similar, you know, a heritage speaker or something, then they're added at any level.
Yeah. We, when I was a principal of, at a DLI middle school and high school, we would test kids at different points and let them, there were different entry points. We just wanted to make sure that they could be successful, but even if they have more of the speaking part and not as much of the reading part, our teachers felt like that they could help, they could support with that, so.
So I'm hearing that even with the state model through second grade at least, we can let them in. Are our principals of our DLI schools trained to know that that's the policy?
I don't think so. I don't know, Jared, do you think they're trained? They're supposed to go through Audi training and know that, but I don't know. We allow the state to train that, but that's something we need to work on.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So it might be just a lack of understanding here. Okay.
Yeah. And I think sometimes if you end up with teachers that might be more frustrated about a student entering later, and that principal might not have been a principal at that school for as long and might not have that rapport to be able to say, let's just help you figure out how to help this kid, then they might be more hesitant to do something like that too. And there could be some languages where they might be more hesitant to do that than others. I might be more willing to do it in Spanish, to put my kid in there in third grade and to help a child with that, but Chinese I might not be, because I would be like, have no idea how to help my child. That could be really rough. I think one of the things, I just wanted to add this too, one of the things I loved about the gal who went through the Chinese dual immersion program, I was doing my hair, she said the thing she loved most about the program was it taught her it was okay not to understand everything in school. And she said, and I couldn't go home and have my parent rescue me in my homework. I had to figure it out on my own. And she said, and it built a resiliency that she said, I don't think I would have had otherwise. And I thought, wow, that was very insightful that she had there.
There's also research to back that up, like that's called cognitive flexibility, and that's one of the main like advantages of becoming bilingual that has nothing to do with the proficiency, but your brain learns to see things in different ways and have more flexibility.
I love all these smart people. Thank you. Okay, so now we're going to talk about, there was a question about the different dual language immersion models. And so this is our Utah State model, the 50-50 model, the most common instructional structure in Utah DLI programs. They spend 50% of the day in English and 50% in the target language. That's important to note that that's in elementary. That's not the case in secondary. With a 2-teacher partner level. And it has some definite strengths, right? Like you're building that target language proficiency. There's a consistent structure. And it does often require additional staffing, and scheduling can be tricky. One of the things that we have that we're trying to work through is like, how do we do win time? So what every student needs, how do we help provide those tier 2 interventions, and what is the role of the language teacher in that process? So we're working through some of that, because in the past they haven't always been required to be part of that process, and we're wanting them to work as a team with all of the students at that grade level team to support them. Do you guys have anything you want to add to this model?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Do the grade level teams include then the DLI and non-DLI teachers together across that grade level?
They should.
that
So
planning?
Jamie, I'll let you speak to that as a
Yeah, I
principal.
mean,
Is that hard to do, kind of?
I don't think so. That's like something that was very important to me coming on, is that the 4 teachers were a team and that they were in the full 90-minute PLC together, working together. All my teachers do win time, and the language teacher participates by doing the enrichment group. But they go as a team, all 4 of them, including the language teacher, go through the data every week for those interventions to regroup kids. So like I really require that they are a full member of that PLC, because they also have a lot to bring in terms of like, how do you teach multilingual learners? And so frequently we have our DLI teachers that are giving our monthly multilingual learner PD, because they understand the strategies that are required for that.
Clinton,
And I would say it's very similar. They combine and they work as a team. For specialties, they divide the whole grade up, and that may be a little unique to what the state model is, but yeah, they do a good job of collaborating together that way.
And during specialties, your non-DLI and DLI students are blended. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that depends on the school. Like
That does.
both Clint and I have that. I'm not sure about all 5 schools.
I don't know. Jerry, can you speak to that at the other schools? I don't know for sure.
I know. Is.
Okay, excellent. I believe that Wasatch is as well, but I also think there have been elementary schools in the past where they have not cooperated on this tier 2 intervention time, or they do meet separately. And so that's where you're seeing, as principals are coming in and we're encouraging that, you're seeing some pushback from some individuals who are like, well, wait a second, this isn't how we've been doing it. But that is what we're seeing works the very best. So this also just kind of shows you that kind of a breakdown of what the instructional time looks like. And this is where sometimes we have some stress with some of our teachers because of the curriculum that we're requiring them to use and what this looks like. But this is what's set up so that you can see at the different grade levels what is required in terms of what they're learning and at different times. And so just give you a second. I know you probably have looked at that, but do you have any questions about that particular chart?
I kind of do. I mean, so I went through some of the slides ahead of time. But
Good job.
My question is, I saw that there's other districts doing other things, but are there other districts that do the same as us?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, but I can't remember off the top of my head, but at least 22 districts are on the state model.
Do the same, yeah.
Yeah,
So they all do
the
the
exact
same as
same,
us. Okay.
That's a great question, actually.
Or
you
is
just
there
have one
any any other districts that do the Timpanogos model?
There are some, like, so Timpanogos predated the state model, and that was the case with some places in Washington County and also Alpine School District, and I'm sure there's other ones too, but I just know about those 2 places. So some of them ended up coming onto the model later, but it's possible that there are some, I'm just not aware of them. I think one thing that's really, really important is that you know that the model is different from the like 1-way versus 2-way. So there's these 3 kind of independent pieces. There's the model of who is the population, there's the model of the time spent in the language, and then there's other models that might have to do with the whole school or the 2-teacher model or pieces like that. But it's like in Utah, you can have a 2-way immersion program, and we have many 2-way immersion programs like Timpanogos in this state that are on the model. Because 2-way just means that at least a third of the students in the program are heritage speakers of that language. But then there's like 50-50, which means half the day, half not.
Right.
There's 90-10, which is full immersion. So, but those are independent pieces. Like you could have a 2-way full immersion.
You can have a 2-way 90-10.
Yeah, you can have like, they don't necessarily go together.
One thing I thought of, I love this slide. Thank you for all.
This is Sarah. I think
So
Sarah
great.
put this slide. I don't remember, but
I mean,
think she
all
put
of
this
this
slide
is
together,
such great information. One thing this made me think about was, I'm thinking about that challenge number 1 where we're talking about the experience of our non-DLI students at a DLI school and our non-DLI schools. And I was just thinking, we have this, I know, for every school, for whether you're DLI or non-DLI, in terms of how your day is split up. So just as we move down the road, I think it might be really interesting to talk about what we're adding in these other spaces. Does that make sense? That makes them uniquely special and opportunities for those students too, just so parents, all of us can understand, right? Like the benefits of these different choices. I think that, I don't know, just for me, I was thinking that that would be kind of interesting to be able to highlight.
Yeah, I don't know that we are very good about making sure that our parents are understanding how the instructional day of their student is even broken out at any school and why it's broken out that way and what the benefits of that happen to be. And that would be beneficial for us to be explaining that.
So Wendy, we are
We have
at our allotted time, so, but
Excellent.
where's the natural
Well,
break?
let's
that-
see.
How far do you want?
Why don't I stop at after this slide, and then we'll move on to the other models. So, the other thing that's important is that there are different assurances that are put in place in our models. And the reason those assurances are put in place is people say, well, then you don't get the funding from the state. I think we have to look at it more from the assurances are put in place because if we follow these assurances, that is how we get the outcomes that we want. And we have to focus more on the fact of the assurances are there because the research is telling us that that's how we land with these outcomes, and worry less about, well, then they're going to cut off our funding if we don't do it this way, because we can figure out how to do it ineffectively even with these assurances. I think the goal is always to be really effective and to make sure we have the best outcomes for students. At the secondary level, and Paula can chime in here, at the middle school, the students take 2 courses. They take a language course and a culture course. And in high school, they're taking 1 course. In their 9th or 10th grade year, they're taking AP or a DLI course. And then those bridge courses, they mix all of the students together. So your 10th, 11th, and 12th graders are all in the same course, but they're talking about different topics and studying the language from different perspectives. So you end up with 3 very distinctive courses in that process. The goal is to have those students earn the seal of biliteracy and that they are reaching high levels of proficiency. Like I said, they can explain how really technical things work, not just I can order, a crepe and a coffee at the market, but that I actually can really converse in scientific things and different spaces like that. One of the things that does happen that we hear about is also when we're trying to hire a DLI teacher at the secondary level, then they're certified to teach, say it's Portuguese, for example, then if I don't have enough Portuguese courses for that teacher, what else am I filling up that teacher's class with? So having a large enough cohort becomes really important in that. Otherwise, then the teacher sometimes has to teach a study skills class because it's hard. You have to be highly qualified, so it's not like I can give them math or how to teach something else. It has to be in that area. And we also want to make sure we're setting that teacher up for success, right? That becomes important as well. There have been some frustrations about, does this make it so that then kids don't have access to other languages? I just also want it known that it's still, even if, let's say I wanted to offer Russian at a high school level, if I only have enough students that are interested in Russian and there's only 30 students in the whole school that want to take Russian, that's going to fill up a single section of Russian. But how am I going to mix Russian 1, Russian 2, Russian 3? I'm going to collapse those all into a single class probably, or maybe split into 2 classes. I'm still not going to have a full-time Russian teacher. I'm going to be picking somebody who teaches something else and then can also teach Russian. We have the same issue in lots of different specialty areas. It's not just something that's explicit to or just specific to a DLI model. So it's just something to keep in mind. There's always these stressors that we place on a secondary schedule whenever we have singleton classes, whatever it is. So, and I'll stop with that.
Okay.
Yay!
Great. We got about halfway.
We got halfway.
Yeah.
Phew!
There you go.
Excellent.
All right. To be continued at our June 9th
Yeah.
meeting. So, all right. With that, we'll move on to the next item, which is our preschool discussion. And
Michelle's
going to lead us in that. Thank you, Michelle.
Bonnie, can you?
Okay, hi everyone.
Hi.
So Wendy just asked me to do a overview of preschool and what we're looking at for this, not this coming year, but the next year. Give you a little background first and kind of where we're at. So if you'll see that first slide, I'm just going to give you some background information that might help before you have questions. So please still ask them, obviously, but background first. So a couple of things to know about early childhood education in the state of Utah. This is Utah specific. There are no state or local funds for preschool allocated to the K-12 system. That's very not typical outside of Utah. We have lots of families that move here and call us to ask, where do I sign up for preschool? And we say, that's not a thing in Utah. So no funds, $0 allocated for local, for any local preschool. In the K-12, that's different than IDA or special ed. So that context, in the students with disabilities, there are funds allocated for those students, for 3 and 4-year-olds specifically in our district, and those funds can only go to students that have an IEP. You can't blend that at all unless you have other dollars to support that. So only funded for that, and that's by student with an IEP. So it's funded directly on what we have. There have been in the past state and federal early childhood education grants. I've worked on several of them in 11 years of doing this, and they are all very, very unstable. So we stopped pursuing those after about 2 years, 10 years ago. We spent 2 years pursuing those. Very unstable. In fact, a lot of districts across the state started preschool programs about 10 years ago and all went under about 5 years ago because the funding is not stable for those. So really hard to get and not the funds we can count on. Also in the state of Utah, the Department of Workforce Services is actually who manages preschool. So there's always a little bit of conflict between USBE and Department of Workforce Services because Department of Workforce Services actually manages all early childhood education in the state. So when you talk about licensing or regulations like the size of counters in the classroom or the height of a door or locks on the playground, or there's a whole bunch of regulations that are required in early childhood education, whether that be a home preschool or a company's preschool or an organization's preschool. I was on the Head Start board for many, many years, and the regulations they're required to put in place are all mandated through the Department of Workforce Services.
Michelle,
yeah.
just to clarify, that's the Federal Department of Workforce Services?
Local to Utah. Yeah,
Local to
in
Utah.
Utah,
So
that's how it works.
Is that federally in all states it works through
Different.
DWS or Utah?
Different. Utah specific for sure. It does. They have their hands in it a lot federally because it's mixed funding typically.
Okay.
Not always, but typically.
That is something
But
our
it's very
legislators
typical.
could change at the state
It
level.
would take a lot to change that in Utah.
Okay.
But yes.
Okay.
But
She's
it would,
pretty fearless
it
when it
would
comes
take
to legislators.
a
I'm just gonna
significant.
tell you that right now.
Yeah. They don't work together. I'm just like, here I am on public record here. But the USBE and Department of Workforce, they're totally two separate entities, right? So when you start having early childhood education in the K-12 system, that's an optional program. It's optional, not funded. Really, the Department of Workforce Services owns it in the state. That's the best way to say it. Manages it in the state of Utah. And there isn't a requirement to work together. There's no have to with work together. So any USBE directive or work for preschool is really IDA focused only. So like for our Title I preschool, I attend those meetings, I'm aware, but what they talk about and train schools on is totally SPED specific.
Okay.
Because those two are completely separate. Okay, so let me give you a compliance example. So technically our Title I preschool is out of compliance with the Department of Workforce Services. So in order to have any program that serves students who are under kindergarten age, under 5 years old, we have to get an exemption from the Department of Workforce Services to have those kids in our buildings because we don't meet their requirements for early childhood education. So we apply for that exemption annually, we get it. We're not alone, lots of districts have to do it, but we have to post that and publicly display that on our little preschool doors that we are not a certified daycare center. That's what we're saying, that we're not certified daycare. Our Sunrise preschool also has to do the same, even though they operate under the IDA, they don't comply with the Department of Workforce Services regulations. So that's one example where the two worlds don't align very well. And then educator licensing is another one. So for students with part of IDA law is students with disabilities have to be served by a licensed professional. So in our Title I preschools, if we have students that have an IEP that is not speech, we actually can't serve them in our Title I preschools. They have to then be transferred over to Sunrise. Our Sunrise teachers are licensed for SPED and for early childhood. And you can only by law serve students with an IEP with those two licenses in place. So our Title I preschool teachers all have an early childhood license or an early childhood education certificate, but they don't have their special ed licensing. So we can't have students with an IEP in those preschool classrooms unless they're speech. And if they're speech, then that works because our speech pathologists come in and do the speech work at each elementary school for all of our preschool kids. So another example of just where things get a little bit complicated with the rules of licensing and regulations. Do you have other questions? Jennifer, your face looks like it has a question.
It does, but you might answer it when we go to another slide. So,
okay,
yeah.
All right, so just some little background about the complications a little bit with early childhood education. So I'm just going to give you an overview of where we are now. If you want history, call me and come talk to me later. So currently preschool in our district, we have a CTE program that serves 4-year-olds, and that CTE program is run at Provo High and Timpview. Tiny T-birds and baby bulldogs is what they have called that. That's run strictly through CTE. And those parents just call the school, they work with the CTE teacher to enroll. It's kind of flexible in the design. The CTE teacher really works on that design, but generally students, like the high school students, have class for a couple weeks, then the preschool kids come for a couple weeks and they practice the things that they learned, and the preschool kids don't come, and then the kids have class again. So it's not a like all day, every day kind of program for 4-year-olds. The purpose of that program really is for the high school students to have their early childhood education experience and then have some kids to practice those skills on. If you've never been to the Timpview's preschool classroom, it's beautiful and
my daughter's a
phenomenal
graduate
and dreamy and amazing. Yes,
Oh, so great.
She's a tiny T-bird.
She was a tiny T-bird.
Can I say something?
Yes.
Oh, I did it for all 3 years, and I also did an internship at
Did you love it?
preschool, and it's really fun. And I will say, like, it's highly demanded for as well. Like, we have to do like a lottery kind of style because so many parents request to try to join. So I think that's something to also think about. Like, this is something that parents do.
Yeah, they do. Provo High is the same way. Wait list is gigantic for that. Yes, thank you for saying that. I'm glad you said that. Okay, so that CTE Sunrise is located at Provo Peaks, and they currently serve 3- and 4-year-olds from any location in Provo School District. Students with disabilities do not pay tuition. I wanted to make sure that's super clear. Now I'm looking, I'm like, does it make that super clear? They do not pay tuition, but they're identified through child find processes. And then also we have tuition opt-in students. So the classes have to have at least a 50-50 ratio in them. And then tuition depends, it's a 45 to 180 depending on the pathway that a parent signs up for. They have 2-day options, 4-day options. They have different options. Where
Is that a
parents can sign
monthly
up.
fee?
Yeah, it is, yeah.
Per day. No, just
Yeah.
And how many classes right now?
It depends, yeah, because of the different pathways, I can't
Right.
answer that
Okay,
exactly.
that's fine.
Yeah,
That's fine.
Yep. They are very flexible with the pathways they offer, which is one reason why we're looking at the program design that we're looking at, yeah. They're able to differentiate according to the needs of students a lot better.
So when you say at least 50-50, do you mean at least 50% of the class has to be students with disabilities, but it could be more?
No,
Or the
other way around.
Other way
Yep,
around. Okay.
Yep. Typical peers or tuition-based students that has to be at least 50 or more.
Okay, thank you.
And those class sizes all vary. There's some really tiny classes that have like 7 and 7, and there's some that have a little bit higher than that. They really do a good job of basing those off of the needs of the students that they're working with. And then transportation is provided for students with disability outside of the Sunrise boundary. So there is some transportation across the district for those
Michelle,
students.
do we know if the tuition that the parents pay actually covers, or like, are we supplementing?
It barely, Devin, you want to answer that one
It doesn't
first?
have to cover the full
Yeah.
amount, you just have to be able to, so there may be aides that are in there working with the kids without disabilities, and it does cover the cost of the aides, but most of the related servers are all covered by IDA and state special ed, so there is a state special ed line as well.
So is your question,
Your
are
question
we
is-
subsidizing this?
correct. Are we
So
subsidizing
how
We're not
much-
subsidizing it. No,
Okay.
the district is not
We
subsidizing
can't.
it.
So when,
Right?
we can't.
We can't.
That was
subsidize
back
it.
to that original slide.
Yeah.
So that $180
Yeah.
then does, like my daughter she currently, or just was in there, I paid $180 a month. That actually paid for everything that the teachers, everything she needed. You guys, we didn't have to cover anything for,
So
as long as I paid
it
my
didn't
$180.
cover everything that normally would be in a preschool, but with the state special ed and the federal special ed
Okay.
and that tuition.
Everything coming
It made
together.
it,
Yes.
it made it allowable and it
Grading
made it
your
so
funds.
that
Got
we
it.
are
This
getting-
is the point.
Yeah.
That's the point. So the answer is no, Gina. Your $180 a month does not cover what we need.
But we're
But
not
it
subsidizing it because there are students in there who are covered
Yes.
by IDEA and they
Yes,
share services.
and we can blend those services.
Got it. Thank you.
Yes.
And we just to clarify and reiterate, even if we said we have this money we want to supplement from our local funds, we cannot use any local funds.
We are not
for this.
You're not
So-
supposed to, yeah.
That's right.
K-12.
Yeah.
That's very important to know. Okay. We met 10 years ago, we went down that road pretty deeply with between the foundation, between fundraising, grants, what's allowable, what's not allowable, and not.
Okay.
Until the state changes legislation.
Okay.
So Jennifer, go girl.
Okay.
I will be behind you with big banners. Okay. All right, so our Title I preschool is located at, next year will be 3 schools. It serves 4-year-old students. You have to, now we fund this solely off of Title I funds. There's no extra funding for Title I preschool. You have to reside in the boundary of a Title I school to come to screening. This is the federal law of Title I. We hold screening annually. We have to serve by Title I law, you have to serve the most at risk of those who are screened. So every year that risk looks a little different depending on the number of kids who show up. So parents often want to know, what's the score? And I'm like, it depends who shows up on where that cut.
It's risk in relation to all the other
All the
students
others.
that are applying.
Yep. And it's weighted on several different factors. We charge $20 a month for tuition. We use it if we get it. We use it if we get it.
She doesn't get very much.
I was gonna say,
It's
what
on the slide.
percentage would you say?
I can show you.
Okay.
Yeah. Like 0. Not 0. I'll show you. I've got the next table has that. We use it for supplies, curriculum, parent engagement activities, and if we have leftover personnel, but we never do. It always is those first few areas that we use it for. And then again, it's funded with Title I and that minimal tuition. Next year will be located at those 3 schools. They're underlined: Franklin, Sunset View, and Provo Peaks. We've combined Timpanogos to join Franklin next year and Spring Creek to join Provo Peaks and Provost clusters next year. We have 108 slots next year. We've had 144, but we'll have 108 next year.
Is there a reason why with the Title I we don't have a scale of what to charge? Like I know some of the people in my neighborhood choose to go to Title I, but they could afford more than the $20 a month.
Yeah, so we don't have a guarantee that any of that money will come in. And we had a procedure in place where we were agreed to not kick anybody out because we serve only the most at risk. So in serving the most at risk, we didn't want to kick. The philosophy at the time was we're not kicking people out. So our tuition, we have to know our budget can fund the preschool with no matter what, paying tuition or not, we're going to have that FTE. So it's an FTE cost we have to know we can pay. So could we ask more? Yeah, but an FTE costs a minimum $150,000.
Well, I guess I'm just asking, like, could we
Mm-hmm.
say,
yeah,
for a
Yes.
lot of them, it's still
Yeah.
gonna be the 20, but for some of you,
Yeah.
you could pay more, so.
Yeah, we have to ask for income and verification of all those things in order to do that.
Do a sliding scale.
Yeah, so we have to,
Almost
we
like
have
a
to
free
do
and
that.
reduced lunch.
Like
type
free and
situation.
reduced lunch.
But again, you couldn't budget that.
We
you were
couldn't
going
budget
to
for it.
collect that,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah, but we could, yes, to answer your question, yes, we could use something like free and reduced lunch, but we couldn't assume that in our budgeting.
Right,
It was gonna be
right.
part of our costs, yeah.
I just want to make it clear, because I did get a text message from a Sunset View parent. They were confused and thought that preschool was at Provo Peaks next year for the 26-27 school year, and that is not happening, correct?
Correct, yeah, that's not,
Okay.
any of the communication.
They are
we
all
sent home.
staying at Sunset View.
Mhm.
Yes.
Okay, let's go to our next slide. All right, so this is just the trend and what's happened with Title I for the past 5 years. You can see our Title I allocation goes down every year. Yep, so there's that.
Michelle, so this is Title I money specific for preschool
No.
or part of
This
just
is our
general
This
Title
is
I
our
for all
total
of our,
Title I budget.
for all of our Title I schools?
Title I budget.
Okay,
And what,
thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
what do,
People
how
think
do
it's a lot more money. It's
Yeah,
not
but
that
how
much
do
money.
we get that number? Like, is
So
it
that is allocated based off of census data
Yeah.
from the federal government. It's so the formula to this, so the feds do the formula to the state does it to the districts. It's census data. And then the state puts in some free and reduced as part of their formula. But it's mostly census data and employment and poverty status of a community. So what it tells us is Provo's workforce community is pretty stable and doing okay.
And if you go back before 2022, it's over 3 million.
3 million.
So
Yeah.
the 2020 census really messed us up.
Yeah.
It messed
Because
up all
it
of
messed
Messed
up
everybody.
all of Utah.
Yeah.
So
that was
the
during
federal
COVID when
funding
people went
overall
this way.
went down in the state of Utah because we didn't have accurate census information because they really extrapolated small pieces over the entire state.
We were cut, but nothing compared to what some districts
some
received.
districts were cut
So actually, I was grateful for our minimal cut.
And on this slide on year, is that the year
The fiscal year.
ending in 2026?
The fiscal year.
Right, so- okay, thank you.
I think the other piece that's important too is when they were looking at this, I know that several of the Title I directors across the state tried to get some federal movement with some of our federal representation to say that this was not, the 2020 census was not an accurate representation. What ended up happening is they're like, Utah is one of the strongest economies. You can't tell me that that's ridiculous. And I'm like, have you tried to buy a house here? Do you know how expensive it is? They don't take any of that into account. So that's not a piece of it. And so in their mind, they're like, well, if you go to Mississippi or you go to these other states, your individuals that are in poverty you're doing way better as a state than a lot of other areas. And so that was why.
Well,
And I don't like it, but I get it.
Yes.
Yeah, and you had at the same time, there's no need to turn in free and reduced
Yeah,
price
that's
lunch
right.
applications.
Right.
Because everything was reimbursed by the federal government
That's
through.
right.
And that just became kind of a habit. And
But
so-
that doesn't affect what the feds give the
Correct.
state. That affects how the state allocates to
Correct.
districts.
Yes.
I see, because all the federal money goes to the state,
Census.
and then the
And
state
the
allocates.
state
Yeah.
adds,
And
our
then
state
allocates.
adds pieces to their formula to
Yes.
allocate
Okay.
to the districts. And one of those pieces is free
Is
reduced lunch.
lunch.
Okay, so this is our total Title I allocation. This column right here is how much the cost is for basically what the schools get. So this includes the Title I coordinators, paraprofessionals, parent engagement, or if other things in their school plan, like sometimes they'll put professional learning activities or things like that. Very minimal, post $3 million allocation. Usually this amount that they're allocated just covers the personnel that they need and the parent engagement. Parent engagements are required 2% set aside on our budget, so really this amount for all the schools is their personnel and parent engagement money. And you can see the difference, I didn't do a difference, but it's not a lot that the district keeps. So when there's an assumption this is a lot more money than actually is. So you can see most of this does go directly to the schools. And then on top of that is the preschool allocation. So the preschool paraprofessional, an FTE plus we pay for a full-time 29-hour para. The adjustment this year was we originally paid for 1.5 of a para, and we reduced that because of what we saw with costs coming. And after watching the preschool, they all felt like one para was plenty, so we reduced from 1.5 to 1. So that's why you see this year went down from that year to this year, but you can see we're rising back up again. So preschool costs us over $500,000 of our Title I money.
Can I just ask a general question about our
Yes.
preschools? Is it a half day or is it a full day?
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. Yes, so we do an AM and PM session, so 2 separate sessions. So we serve 18 students in the morning, 18 different students in the afternoon. So
Okay,
it's
thank
half
you.
day, 5 days a week.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, good. And then this is just the numbers who were screened, and this one doesn't include our June number, but we screen. You can see the number of screening right here that come to our annual screening. We do a screening in May, and then we actually do a couple more in June once parents find out, oh, I missed the screening date, or oh, they missed the screening date. So a couple weeks ago when we had our May one, we screened 112. we have about 55 more to screen this summer, so that number will get up a little bit closer. We have way more that fill out a survey of they are interested in preschool. That number is really, if you really wanted, I can get that back to you. It's not super clean data. Parents will fill the survey out 2 and 3 and 4 times, so we have to filter that out. And then parents out of boundary, it's just an open survey, so parents out of boundary fill it out too. So we have to filter all that, and we only screen students who reside in the boundary of a Title I school. And then you can see our wait list numbers right here. That means the students who didn't get in when we place them. We don't place full in each class. In the May screening, we don't fill to 18 and 18. We fill, depending on what the screening looks like, we fill about 80% capacity. We kind of wait because we know this summer group of move in, move out, find out that somebody needs it that didn't know that they need it. We kind of wait a little bit for that and fill it right at the end of July. And then this is what we are noticing a huge trend in that's concerning, is that once we have the slots filled, if there is always movement in our Title I schools, we cannot fill those with Title I families who've come to screening. So we're sitting this year at,
So 31 spots available.
Wait, why can't you?
There's nobody that wants in. So,
I see.
so we've
too big.
exhausted the
Because
wait
they've already
list.
gone
They either
somewhere
found
else.
another
Yeah,
preschool,
okay.
or they've moved,
Yeah,
they no longer
sure.
live here, or they're like, we're good, we don't need preschool
Yeah, yeah.
anymore. So
Right.
the reasons vary,
Right.
but we cannot fill them.
I see,
Yeah.
okay.
And we have a pretty robust advertising program,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
very robust advertising. You've seen our yard signs everywhere, but we don't just have those. So we feel like we really have
Yeah.
done a lot with that to just advertise. There are several schools that we don't even screen when they register a family. If the secretary sees a 4-year-old, we just say, preschool for you! And we don't screen them once the year. We don't wait for screening to happen once the year goes on, once we've exhausted our list. And then you can see what we've collected for tuition. So Melanie, Gina, one of you answer that question. You can kind of see what we collect over the year of what comes in for tuition. And we send reminders, but we don't count on that money coming in to do much, but parent engagement and a little bit of curriculum.
But if they have an IEP, they're not charged.
Correct. Well, no, that's not true. If they have a speech, they would still, yeah. If they qualify through this process, yes, they would pay.
Because we were never sent a bill.
We don't send the bills, we just send the reminders.
Oh.
Yeah.
My husband didn't give me that reminder. If we ever got one.
It's okay.
Yes.
It's okay.
They forgive you.
All right, any other questions just on like the trends of overtime? Okay, all right. So what we're proposing, I think that's our next slide here, is consolidating our services. So, and that, hopefully I've laid a little bit of a foundation of the why. So declining enrollment a little bit, declining funds, but really, that's important to know, but really what we want to do, and this is what I want you to hear, is to provide more services for students across Provo City. We think that when we consolidate our programs between IDA and Title I, both the IDA state and IDA funds and tuition, and with what Sunrise already options with multiple pathways, we can have better fit for services across the city. So we think centralizing the program increases access for students. We know it will be ouchy to not have it in your walking neighborhood school. I recognize that totally. We also can see that aligning the resources will make our system a little bit more efficient. So we envision creating lots of optional pathways. So let's say, let me give you an example. We had a group of students who tested a few weeks ago who were twins, off the charts on the academic scale, and I wouldn't recommend them. They qualify based on who came to screening. They would go into the preschool that they get into, but I wish I could have said to the mom, she goes, I don't need them to go every day, just a little bit. And I'm like, yeah, I could see just a little bit. They needed a pathway that was 2 days a week for a certain amount of time. Yeah. There are some kids who need 5 days a week. There are some kids who need just to come for speech and maybe a singing time or an art time to get them. And we know we can develop those different kinds of pathways, but only if we can blend our resources together between Sunrise and Title I. So really that's what we want to do, is provide more options for parents and students based off of the information that we learn about those kids. We still would do screening the same way. We would probably open screening citywide and not just keep it to students in Title I schools because we would look at a citywide screening process and then invite parents and to the different pathway that they would qualify for. We can blend our support services, so that's probably another big one for me too. Is so our preschool currently at our Title I schools, they don't have the ability to they meet as a PLC once a week, but they don't have the ability to like day-to-day collaborate or plan together. So the ability to have all of our preschool teachers collaborating, looking at student information together, having our training together. We do our training as much as we can together, but on site. Being able to differentiate student needs where you and I can work together on what the student needs and teaming together. We're not able to team together when they're independent at their different sites. So we're really excited that we think that would provide some good benefits to students as well. So you can see all those there. So what questions? That's the information. Our next steps are getting feedback from our leadership team, gathering feedback from principals and those that are involved in this preschool program, and just coming up with the best options for students as we look to this. So what questions do you have?
So just to be clear, consolidating, figuring things out, you're not asking us for extra money to help support this? Okay.
And when you say, so one preschool would be the ideal?
The idea, yeah, what we're looking at is consolidate, so would be no more preschool at the Title I schools, all preschool at Sunrise.
Okay.
Jane, did you, were you in there?
Yeah.
It stresses Gina out.
It does, because I know a lot of the students in my area have stopped doing the screenings because they never got in previously, right? So the word is, you can go to the screenings, but you're not gonna get in. So that's one thing. The other thing is, they don't take them in Timpanogos area because it's too far for them. I know one grandma who would, I think it was last year, would walk her kid there and back.
Yeah.
That's pretty rare. And so the transportation issue is going to be a problem. I understand the constraints, and I'm not even necessarily against this, but without transportation, we're gonna lose more of these kids, at least in my area. I don't know about in Terry's area, but we're gonna lose more of these kids because they can't get them there.
Well,
Yeah.
they were Thomas was bused, and as a 3-year-old, he thought it was the coolest thing ever. He got to ride a bus to school twice a week.
Yeah, we have looked at, one of the things that we are talking about is in doing this, busing is a different option because we can consolidate those resources, right? It's not an option for any Title I parent right now because we can't afford that.
Right.
So that no matter what, if it stayed, that couldn't happen. If we consolidate, there is an opportunity for us to be able to look at busing. But because the students with disabilities are already bused, there would be on the table as a conversation about what does that look like? Does that look like all the Timpanogos preschool kids go to Timpanogos and the bus picks them up from there? And we might have to look at other resources to support transportation. So I guess my answer to you is no, I'm not asking for funding is true right now at this minute, but that doesn't mean it.
And can we use funds for like transportation?
Right now,
Can we
no
use-
local funds can be used for preschool.
Yeah, so I don't- even for
there's
transportation,
there's
right?
a different conversation to have. Yeah.
Okay. But in theory, if the IDA portion is funding transportation for our
Yeah,
students with
so could our
disabilities,
tuition
'cause
money,
there's
do we look at
space-
tuition differently to have?
Yeah, because
Because we can, tuition, we can use whatever we want for.
For
it.
busing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I see.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah.
Is there a way to, I mean, I like this idea. I do worry about people in our Title I communities getting there. And so is there a way to I don't even know what the question is I have about that. Are we hoping to have, right now it sounds like we kind of have 4 classes of preschool going on, hopefully
3
at a time, right? Because one at each Title I school and a separate?
No, we have,
they can-
no, we,
Sunrise
yeah,
consolidates.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
so would we hope to still have kind of,
We don't want to decrease the number of kids that we're serving. But it wouldn't look the same
It
as
won't
it does
look the
now.
same,
We're not
no,
going to
I
like
understand.
take the Sunset View
Yes.
Preschool and put it over there and
Right,
put it there
right.
because that defeats the purpose of consolidating and
and
meeting
it
kids'
sounds like
needs
it
differently.
depends on
So
what the needs
what
are.
we want to
Yeah.
do is meet the needs of the kids
Yeah.
more strategically than we are right
Mhm.
now. And Gina, as a follow-up to yours, we have to serve the most at risk, right? So there are students who don't get in with that Title I funding. When we screen bigger and have other funding sources, that could look very differently, right? So in theory, more kids could get in. They wouldn't get in for free,
Right.
right? But we can't even put them in right now because we don't, right? We have to serve the most at risk.
I echo a lot of the same concerns about consolidating. What access is that going to have? And so I'm glad to see that there are next steps, that we're gonna keep looking at this, talk to leadership teams. I hope we'll talk to our preschool teachers, maybe get a feel from our parents as well, right?
Yeah,
But
we can-
I
we
really
can do
do
that.
worry, even on a bus, I worry if that just feels too far away. I know there's something to be said when they stay local too, they get attached to that school and see themselves there for kindergarten and things like that too. And I also, I'm just thinking out loud here, I find it interesting that we're saying we can best serve our students in preschool by bringing them all to one site at the exact same time we're saying our special ed students, to best serve them, they need to be closer to their neighborhood schools. And I guess that's a bigger conversation of, are these different enough that that is true, or do we kind of end up at the same spot with both of them? Either they're all consolidated or they're all
Jason, do you want to
different
add?
sites.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think we should have a separate conversation about that, but there
Yeah.
are two very different problems that we're trying to solve with that. So the state has continuously lowered the number of students who qualify for the alternative assessment. And so students have to have more time, special ed students have to have more time in their regular ed classroom. And so with having those kids who are beyond kindergarten in severe classes all in one school, I think we've mentioned multiple times that in second grade there's over 20 students in that age range. So at that one elementary school, they can't all fit in their second grade classes and have it function currently. So the reason to have them be in classes closer to their home school is to allow for them to be out in regular ed classes more than they are currently. So again, there are resource issues to both, but they are a different problem that we're trying to solve.
The other piece that's important about this is we're consolidating and moving. The special education students are already being served in the single location, and they have to be because of the licensing of the teacher. That gets really difficult to have that.
We can't take those students and put them into our Title I preschool unless we certify all those teachers and expect those teachers to have dual certification. So we actually can't go the other way with preschool. That's why that first slide, that goes back to that Department of Workforce Services and licensing issue. Yeah. And I will say, I mean, my dream was a preschool in every elementary school, fully funded by the state. So put that in your public record, everybody. Like, that's what I really want if I'm dreaming. I can see trends of data and trends of enrollment, and our enrollment is down, our fiscal resources are changing, and Title I preschool is an optional program that's costing over half $500,000. And when the cost of employees go up every year, what it's doing is giving less funding to our K-6 Title I program. That's what it's doing. And that's okay if that's what you choose to do, and that's okay. It just needed to be on the table as like, this is what's happening. So.
Okay.
I have another question. Does Ondalyn and all the staff, are they prepared to be able to take all these kids?
Yeah, so we're not cutting FTEs. We're really picking it up and moving it and aligning resources. So yeah, so Ondi has been in conversation. Nate Edwilson and I have worked together on this. All the preschool teachers in the Title I schools are aware of it and very actually excited about it. Ouchy feeling for their community that they live in for sure, but overwhelmingly, like, this would help us so much be able to collaborate and meet different needs of their kids. That was their feedback. Jason was with me in all those meetings if you want to interject, but all of those teachers felt like this will help us meet the needs of our kids a little differently. At the same time, how we all feel, like, well, it's taking it out of the elementary school, and that feels kind of hard too.
But to that point, it's actually only in three of the 7, 4, if you count Provo Peaks, right? Right now, it's Title I.
3.
It's in 3.
Right now it's 4. We decreased Spring Creek.
That's right.
To
Okay.
consolidate because of numbers. So 3 physical schools.
Yeah,
serve
you have that.
7 Title I schools.
Yeah, access to them, their kindergarten classrooms,
Yeah.
which is something and great, but it's also not one.
No,
every single
it's
Title I
about,
school.
it's not quite, I mean, depending on the year, but it's say it's half of the school. So half-ish of the Sunset View cluster goes to Sunset View. That's not totally accurate every year. That's not totally accurate. but close. So, all right.
Well, thank you for
You're welcome.
helping us understand this, and we look forward to hearing after the next steps happen. So, all right, we are super behind. So, Devin, we'll turn it over to you for the next few financial things. I'm wondering with our large purchase requests, if you just want to discuss them at the business meeting, or we'll vote
It
on
could be,
them.
I can shorten the budget discussion
Okay.
significantly,
Well, we'll
because
just-
it's really not that much different than before, but Bonnie, if you want to bring it, or at least click on the link.
For the large purchase or
presentation.
the
No, for
budget?
the, let's do the large purchase first. So the first one is the Franklin Kindergarten Playground. This is reusing most of the equipment. They're just putting the board in place in the playground and adding one new piece of equipment in there. So that one's pretty simple.
They're replacing the plastic
The
rock.
rock, yes.
Yeah, that makes me nervous for those little kids jumping off of it.
So they, so that's what is being replaced or done at Franklin. The Chromebooks are, normally we order 3,300 a year. This year we approved 1,100 about a month and a half ago. Those have arrived. Then the next is another 1,650. So we're just doing 2,750, which will replace all of Centennial. And then do enough of Sunset View and Franklin. Theirs are at the age of disposal, so they are more than 4 years old currently. Yes.
And have we, I know I should know this, have we changed to Chromebook carts at some of these, or are we like still waiting to
That is part of the
find out?
process. Once we create
Okay,
a
just
tech
remind me.
committee, so
Okay.
with the negotiations, one of the committees that will be formed is a technology
Okay.
committee that will evaluate how are we going to do technology in elementary schools? How are we? But that is not happening this school year,
Okay.
and those schools are needing the new
Yeah,
Chromebooks for what they are currently doing now. That will be adjusted as we go, and as we change the needs, and some of those newer Chromebooks can be moved to some of the schools that are the next in line into carts. So they're not stuck at that school forever. It's just, this is what we need right now to continue. We are even shortening it by 650. Number one, that's because they don't have 650 in stock. And when I talked to Jacob Palmer in technology, he said that they would be able to make it work.
So one of the things to think about is our middle schools can no longer send Chromebooks home, so teachers won't even be able to
Okay,
send home
okay.
homework with a Chromebook. They have to send home paper copies. That starts, I
Starts this
believe,
year.
July.
I thought-
So they can opt in to having a Chromebook, but a teacher can't require it. And so we need carts at the middle schools because we've got to have a way to charge
This is
them.
what I was trying to remember,
Yeah,
thank you.
yeah,
Okay.
you bet.
Okay.
And then like Jevin said, we have a committee, and we're working with Jason and I just met with the association today, so we can have a K-3 committee, a 4-6 committee, a 7-8 committee, and a 9-12 committee that starts looking at, because USBE will come out their model policy, and I think just by November or December as to the amount of minutes. And then we already want them to start meeting and kind of thinking about how, so that they can provide feedback to the policy committee on that.
Question about the Chromebooks. I was just thinking about it when my daughter turned in her senior Chromebook. And it's just basically obsolete, done. But is this, maybe I would put this out there that maybe there's a chance we could have the family buy the Chromebook.
That's actually already something that I have in my,
Great.
have a thought of, is doing a technology deposit their freshman year, where they would take the Chromebook, it would be theirs through the 4 years, and at the end, they could not take the deposit back and keep the Chromebook.
I think it would be a great way, and if there's a way to eliminate the collection every summer.
We've also talked
Type
about
of
that.
thing.
Yes, that is also been something that we
There's
talked
plenty of
about.
parents who are happy to turn it back in.
I know,
so,
but
yeah.
I just see how much time and effort and like it's taking away from the end of the school year that they're like, well, my Chromebook's turned in, so what am I gonna do for the last week of school? I hear that as well.
Just all valid
things.
concerns.
All valid concerns, and I know I'm going off.
All,
script
no,
here.
all things that can, all things that
Rachel's
will-
got a comment.
No, they're all
Also,
great comments.
Just want to point out, like some of the peers at like Alpine School District, I know that they can buy back their Chromebooks, and a lot of kids do it. And I was kind of surprised that we didn't have that. So I think that's something we can look at.
Yep, nope, it's definitely something that we're looking at. We have a pretty high level of loss is the issue. So we have a lot of Chromebooks get severely damaged throughout the year, especially in our middle schools. And so a lot of times we replace them and then move them into this, so that the high schools have newer ones. Anyway, it makes it just a little problematic, but
I think
it
also
is definitely something we're looking at.
maybe having like the option of like freshmen's like understanding like I can buy this in the future. Maybe they'll take better care of it. Something like
There's
that.
always that hope.
What
Come
happens
on,
with the
they can feel like
elementary
they
ones
can
when they
freely
age out?
do whatever they want.
That,
with
those,
it.
Yeah.
they're
It's that kind of
usually
ownership too.
disposed of,
They have their stuff.
because, or they hold them in for students who have break one, so.
Okay, are we ready to
Yep.
move on to our next item?
Yep. All right, so
Budget?
this is our budget. So a lot of the budget hasn't changed fund-wise, only a couple have changed in a very small way. And just because we got a little bit more information about what is happening for the rest of this year and next year. So and then the total for this year, so when we combined the Capital Projects Fund and Municipal Building Authority Fund this last year, and when the last column on the, so go all the way up to page 9. Because all of this is just what we did last year, or last week, and it's not necessary. So for the first thing though is the statement about our property tax increase, the truth in taxation. So this is the tax impact of what we're looking at. The total that we're asking for is $4 million, but the net increase is $3,149,100. And that's because we do have that decrease in the debt service fund. So part of it goes to the general fund when really in the past several years we've had a transfer from the general fund into capital. With that increase in the capital projects fund, we aren't doing that transfer any longer. So it's really just a wash in capital and a $4 million increase in the general fund. So you can see that that's what that impact will be. So let's keep going to the next page. One more.
And that's for our teacher salaries primarily.
Correct. Mostly for teacher salaries. One more, Bonnie, sorry. And one more again. I've lost my, so this page is on the left side is the FY27 budget for each of the funds. And then on the right side, the final budget for 25-26 that's all of the funds together. So you can see that the budgets for the 2 years are pretty similar, including, other than the bond proceeds from the bond sale in October for the Municipal Building Authority bond that we're using to build Timpview. And that's why you'll see in this year, when there's the net change in fund balance, this year it's an increase because we still have those bond proceeds, and next year will be a decrease from those funds that we're spending.
Using them now.
Correct, yep. So a lot of people look and say, well, some years you're bringing in way more than what you were supposed to, and other years you're spending way more. Then that's just timing. A lot of times in our revenue and expense recognition places, we will spend more one year than we're spending prior year funds. So if there are no other questions, I can end the budget discussion there because the rest of it is pretty similar. We'll do another one, a more thorough one, the last meeting during our hearing in June.
Okay. Any questions right now for Devin? Okay. And between now and June, we're gonna get more detailed numbers from the county, is that right?
I'm hoping.
That's the plan, anyway.
The numbers, final valuation numbers are actually due on Friday. So we
This
should.
week Friday?
This week, Friday, the 29th is generally when those are. Yep, it is. It feels like May's just dragged on. So it really has been the longest month of the year. I always thought it was like February when it was cold, but it wasn't cold enough to have it be long this year. So So I should have more information. That second meeting in June, I will have the exact amount. Because what I don't have right now is if there were any growth numbers this year. I don't know what that valuation will be. So that the whole amount and what that impact will be on homeowners could change unless something drastic happens and people have lost value of 50% of their home. The numbers, the actual impact for homeowners should be down. That's really worst case scenario is what I did. I always find that if you give the worst case scenario and it turns out better, people aren't as mad at you as if you give maybe what it could be and then it's more. So we do worst case. Yes.
Thank you for all your patience with me and
You're
my
totally
budget
fine.
questions. Devin's going to sit down with me. But one question I just wanted to ask here, because a couple people have asked me about this, is around child nutrition. We've been spending down.
Correct. And it's been a planned spend.
A planned amount. Okay.
So
Can you
here's
just
two
describe
things
that
with
again
this.
for me?
So
Thank you.
so there's two things that have happened. So you had a 4-year kind of lag of realizing that our food costs had gone up significantly up and our revenue had stayed fairly steady.
Right.
Or gone down because where our enrollment is dropping, our lunches are not dropping as much as our enrollment. So people are still choosing to eat lunch. Well, I guess everybody chooses to eat lunch. It's just whether they buy it from Child Nutrition. They also had some additional positions that they added with all of that rescue money that they received from the federal government during COVID.
Thank you.
So there was those expenditures that kind of built up, and now what I've asked our child nutrition is to really start looking at what's necessary. One of the cool things that we do is all of our food is most of our food that is made is from scratch.
So great.
And so the food costs may be a little bit different than a district who buys ready-made, but that's actually put us in a perfect position for a lot of the new federal guidelines on dyes and food and nutrition guidelines. But there are some of the schools that I feel like have a few too many people. So that's one of the things that we're working on right now. So you'll see more of a spend down. Number one, budgets are always higher than what I think it's going to come in. Because if I go over budget, I have broken state law. And I won't go to jail, but I'll have to write to the state auditor about how I'm never going to make that happen again. So we always have our projection, plus we have to add some to make sure that we can cover anything that is out of the ordinary. And I never know, because sometimes people get a little behind in paying bills, and then a huge amount will come in the month of June, and I won't be prepared for that. But there were small wares, there was some equipment, there were tables, there's all of those things that have been purchased over the last couple of years that have been spent down, planned to spend down.
Yeah. So that's a plan. I just want you to.
And there is the increase in meal costs this year now that we've kind of figured out, okay, this is where I think we need to be.
Well, and anyone should go get school lunch, because
It's
it
so
is
good.
So
It's actually really
good.
good.
I haven't had it, and others just they
so
do an
good
amazing
here.
job.
Our cooks and our child nutrition department does an amazing
They are
job
awesome.
creating a great menu. So
Yes, my daughter has asked me to get the recipe from the school.
I love it so much.
Seriously, she loves hamburgers, and I make them. She's like, "Mom, you gotta get the recipe from the school." I'm like, "Okay."
That's awesome.
Yeah, I had a past student say, "You should come have school lunch with me. It's so good." And I was like, "That is a big change from when I grew up." And I was like,
I know. I'm like,
and
So
it is
anyway.
pretty inexpensive when you look overall
Thank you
at
for
what
describing
they're
that.
paying for it. But yes, the spend, when you look at the FY27 budget, it's much closer.
It is, yeah.
Because we don't have that spend down, and we do have some positions that will be absorbing through attrition.
Thank you.
All right, if anyone has any other questions, you can reach out to Devin between now and our next budget discussion. And quickly, we've also got our truth and taxation tax impact schedule.
So if you want to bring that up, Bonnie, it's just the same as last year, or last week, or 2 weeks ago. I feel like every week is a year. So it just goes through what the purpose of the fund is for, what the impact will be on each of the individual types of, if it's a home, if it's a business, and what we're asking for and what that will impact. So that's what this is. This is just the $4 million ask, and the net of 3.1. So you'll see what that requested budgeted tax revenue is, and then what that proposed rate is based on last year's valuation that is not really last year's valuation. So, I mean, as confusing as it can possibly get, that's where we are at the moment. So if we all were to stay the same without the change to the state basic rate, we'd be a little bit lower than what we were 2 years ago. So not as low as last year, but that year was the year that we didn't get certified in our tax increase from last year. So the year before, we're actually a little bit lower than that. So.
Okay, any questions? Okay, thank you, Devin. All right, item 10 is about expiring policy 6900, funding our small district schools. Wendy, pass that off to you.
Yeah, there was a policy that was passed.
2022.
Thank you. I thought it was 2022. I was trying to pull it up really quick. That just had some requirements for some things that needed to be put in place if a school was dropping in enrollment. And so there was a plan that was required according to this policy to implement an educational focus to try to attract more students, and a funding model that would actually support educational goals, and then a comprehensive data review in the third year of the plan. And then the board would then make a decision as to whether or not the school would keep going as is, if they would change the boundaries or close the school. And so there was instructed a procedure to be lined out, which I don't see that there's a procedure that ever has been adopted in response to this. And so we just were talking about, with all of the boundary discussions that we're having, that our policy committee needs to rewrite a policy about this process and take it to our elementary DLA and boundary study committee for feedback, so that people feel like this is a very transparent and they're understanding what are those indicators that we use when we're determining. I mean, we have in policy that we're going to reevaluate boundaries every 5 to 7 years. We don't have specifically in policy what triggers, what could trigger even something like that we should change those boundaries or those pieces. And I think you had a question that was tied to this,
Yeah,
Terry.
I have other questions too.
Oh,
I mean,
please.
I remember when we passed this and I didn't like it, but I voted for it anyway. Technically, we're out of compliance with this because we didn't create a procedure, and I would assume part of the procedure would have been notifying the principals, hey, you qualify as a small school, this
Agreed, yeah.
your number, your enrollment number this year was this number, but that never happened.
And at this point in time, you asked for which schools were in that. And so there were 3 schools in 2022 in the 21-22 school year that had gone just barely below that 400 mark, and that was Canyon Crest, Spring Creek, and Franklin. So those 3 were the 3 that were in that. Now, what we also were dealing
And
with.
were those 3 schools the same schools every year since then?
No. So they've kind of gone up and down. So Canyon Crest is no longer in that 300 to 400 range, but so far, like this year, we have Amelia, Franklin, and Spring Creek that are within that 300 to 400 range. So, you know, it's replaced one and put in another. Part of that was, it was a 1-year dip for several of them, because you look at 2021, that was the year when it was right after COVID, a couple of years after COVID, you know, and we were still rebounding. So I think that the reason why there wasn't a trigger of the policy was just because there was a lot of how many people are still going to come back, and so who went away to homeschool because they didn't want to have to wear masks in schools, or you know, lots of different reasons. So I think that was one of the reasons why that didn't trigger at the time, is because it was some of them were like 8 students below that 400, and it was a 1 year. The year before they were over 400, so there wasn't really it wasn't desperate.
And so Keith had a meeting with the 3 schools that were lowest, which was Amelia, Franklin, and Spring Creek, and I accidentally was in the building, and so I went to that meeting. I remember it. But I only remember Amelia doing anything about it. They made a whole video about, Amelia's awesome, come to our school.
So
Franklin got caught up in
so the-
CSI, and
yeah.
I don't know,
Yeah.
Jill Franklin was probably the principal at Spring Creek at the time, and she retired, so I don't know if
Well,
any of
the
that
the
happened.
proposal tonight, and it's on our business meeting, is do we want to vote to retire this policy, right? And then and we talked about this a little bit last time, right? Rather than being specific by school, we've talked about working on a more district-wide comprehensive policy. So does anyone have any other questions or thoughts they want to share now before we'll also have the chance to talk about it before we vote tonight?
I did.
Go ahead, Terry.
My one concern was that technically we are out of compliance with this policy. Are there any other policies that we're out of compliance and without giving more work to policy committee that we're not in compliance with? Because I don't want to be out of compliance with any policy.
I wouldn't be surprised if we weren't in compliance with other policies, but that's why we're going through all of the policies and that's why there is
so
a
many.
requirement to go
Yeah.
through them regularly to make sure that your practice and the state practice has not changed.
I think one of the things that I think about is, are we working hard to get everything up to date in what we're doing? So like a good example of that are all of the policies about medical treatments and pieces. I mean, we had pieces of policy that were over 20 years old that we updated and made sure was correct. So you could be right. I don't know that I have the manpower at this point to go through every single policy and see that. We are trying to get through the
We've
ones,
done
and I
them
just
series by series so
Yeah.
far though, and so
Yeah.
I think we're auditing as quickly
Yeah.
as possible.
Yeah.
But yeah,
So-
it is a concern.
Yeah, thank you to the state legislature for giving you guys more work.
All right, any other things about this?
Do you have any other questions, Terry?
Mostly like, what's the plan in place to replace this?
I think one of the things we talked about in policy committee was just to start looking at some of the other districts' policies, and we kind of talked a little bit about that and shared with you some of those in last board meeting. Looking through that and seeing, are there ones that we want to use as a model that have tended to work well? Start to create a draft of what that might look like, and then start taking that out to stakeholders and to the board to have a conversation so that what we don't want is, I think what became apparent is it felt like whatever policy we were creating at the moment was going to be reactive to whatever was happening. We need a policy that's very objective and that doesn't feel like it's targeting any specific school population. It's something that we're looking at entirely as a district, and we would apply at any point in time so that we're being equitable across the board.
And go ahead.
I did, after our policy committee, they did send an email to everyone with like resending those sample policies from other districts, so we could all kind of just keep looking at,
We
and you
kind
could
of-
share feedback with.
We narrowed it down to two.
Yeah, to the Salt Lake
and Jordan.
Yeah. So that you can let the policy committee know as you look at those, like, oh, these things are important.
Because we're kind of
or these
taking
are the
pieces
things.
from from both of those and saying, what can we use? Like, we like this part of this, we like this, but trying to make it so that it's Provo.
So hopefully you got that.
And our
I sent it
parent
to everybody.
committee that we're in the process of taking applications right now, they're going to be looking at our DLI program considerations and helping to give ideas, suggestions on that, as well as feedback and ideas on this boundary policy as well. That's kind of the scope of what that committee will help with. So I think that will help. We're going to have 2 parents from all 13 elementaries. So that will help us to make sure we're being as objective as possible as we do develop this policy. Lisa?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, Terry, in terms of the timeline and sort of process, what I think is really helpful is if anyone has feedback on those policies that were attached to our last board book, including the public if they want to engage early on. The policy committee's goal is to get that feedback now just as a starting point so that we could create some kind of a working draft that then when we have the parent committee
Right.
and this is something that then we can start getting feedback on, but we
Right.
wanted to create a first draft to look at and respond to. We wanted that to be informed by people here and by those sample policies and anyone else who feels like that. There is a difference in terms of those two policies. One is a policy for school boundary evaluations as well as programmatic evaluations, and the other one maybe is just about kind of boundaries specifically, but could also be. So anyone here who has feelings like it would be good to put both in, or I think these should be separate policies, I think that'd be helpful feedback for the policy committee to have now, so that when we do create a draft, we know, are we trying to create two drafts, one that's around program evaluations and sizes and facilities around that or whatever, and one that's around school boundaries and closures, etc.
Okay,
We already have 53 people who would like to be on that committee.
awesome.
So
That's
that's awesome. So we'll send it out again. We have a couple of elementary schools that aren't represented, so I'll work with Jared on that.
Okay. And that is open until
June 15th.
Yeah. Okay. All right, we are going to have to save our policy first reading.
Oh,
So, do we have a motion to
The funnest
adjourn
part.
our study session?
I move that we adjourn our study session.
Motion by Board Member Hall, do we have a second? Second by Board Member Boyce, we are adjourned, and we will try to start as close to 6 o'clock as possible in the 86 before